We trust that all your family and friends are well and staying safe. And that's what we're here tonight to talk about, which is how to keep our extended families safe as we perhaps venture back into the workplace. For those of you who didn't attend last week's roundtable, the producers that you're going to see bigger on the screen tonight are just a portion of the PGA's Production Safety Task Force, which has been working for months with various unions and organizations to help our industry get back to work safely. I can tell you that this task force has seen at least 56 different protocols and documents from around the world that have informed the way this task force has been moving forward. We started this task force to discuss how to move our industry into a place where we had one industry-wide guideline that we could all follow. Unfortunately, it seems like that ideal is a little further away. And so the PGA task force, we decided to take the good work that we've been doing and come out with a series of documents that a producer working in a non-studio environment can use as a guideline for safely planning for our productions. So in other words, this is specifically for producers working on independent productions. And to recap, the documents that we're finalizing right now are a summary of the AMPTP and the way forward documents that are written specifically from the producer's perspective. A green light document that helps you as a producer go step by step to decide how and where right now is safe to start a production, and suggestions on what you should put in place before you officially green light something. And then a red light protocol, that is, what do you do if somebody tests positive on a production or tests positive and they're not really positive, a false positive? What are the protocols to follow? Another document, which is budgetary guidelines, how to make sure you're budgeted for all the COVID safety issues and all the things that we as producers are finding out that are the intangibles. We're going to try to help you not have to do what some of us have done, which is afterwards figure out we should have budgeted for that. Codes of conduct for both the crew and the producing team, and notes from the field, which are suggestions, helpful hints of other producers that have already been in the field testing out some of the protocols. I think I might have missed job descriptions for the HSS and HSM. So these documents are going through a final vetting, and then we'll be sending them individually to the various guilds for their input. That'll probably be next week. And once they've gone through a legal vetting, we'll be disseminating them wide to the entire PGA producers. So obviously a word of caution. I have to say this for the lawyers. These are just guidelines. Everyone still needs to do their own production safety plan and get their own advice from your counsel. And if you're working on a project, you should review the producer's plan and make sure that the plan provides you what makes you feel comfortable to go back to work. So we hope in the meantime that these weekly conversations will help disseminate the information that are in these documents to all of us, because we greatly need it. So these documents are only possible with the great work of people you see on the screen and people that you don't see, including Susan and Michelle from the PGA. And I'd love to, and the AP Council, who's not here on the screen also. So I'd love to have those on the task force quickly introduce yourself. And then we're gonna go through our summary document and then open it up to questions, because we really want this to be something tangible and helpful as we're all going through this together. So let us start with Harvey.
Hi, Harvey Wilson. I'm an EIC and line producer and have been in LA for 4 years, but from the East Coast. Hope you're all safe from the storm still. This has been a really interesting exercise on our part, and hoping that all of you do, just real quick, read these, whether you're creating your own protocol or you're participating in a production that has their own protocol. Just make sure that you stay safe for yourself.
Great. Jen?
Hi guys, Jen here. I'm a line producer, DGA UPM. I've been working with the Producers Guild on production safety since about 2013. And we have a production safety initiative page on the Producers Guild website that offers helpful tips on how to create a production safety plan in general, which you can then apply to your COVID plan.
Mary Jo.
I'm Mary Jo Winkler here from New York-based film and television producer. I am actually in the process, I'm executive producing a television series called Why the Last Man in Toronto for FX. And we are in the process of trying to get the show back on its feet. We're about just shy of 11 weeks away from shooting and just getting started. So it's pretty daunting, and happy to have been part of this task force. Like Harvey, I encourage everyone to really read through these documents. I think it's a very there's so much information out there that it's a great way to sort of organize your thoughts and sort of prioritize what to pay attention to as a producer.
Mary Jo, I'm going to want you to talk tonight a little bit about the testing and the Canadian issues with testing your crew there, and how to get how you're getting through that. So once we get to the testing side, I'd love for you to talk about that.
Sure, thank you.
And Michelle and Susan from the PGA, and Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary Lucchese. I'm former president of the Producers Guild, co-president with Lori McCreary for the past 4 years. I'm now president emeritus, and I don't know, I feel like I can say this for most of the people on our committee, that when we watch the news at night and they start talking about how to get businesses back going and things like that, our document is so thorough. I keep wanting to say to them, just turn it, go to a couple of producers and they'll show you what we've come up with. Oh my God. So hope you read it.
And Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Tomes, and I'm a prior chair of the New Media Council. I'm a producer of New Media. I currently head up creative services for the Disney Television Studios. And I actually can attest to literally what Gary just said. What has been written and put together by this team is prepared me for what I had to deal with today, which was a dry run at Disney. So by having known what was coming, I was able to be in the right place at the right time. I had my PPE with me. I knew what to do with it, and I was able to have informed conversations with people throughout the entire dry run. And so it's a testament to this team that even people in a studio can look at this material and think, oh my God, this is really a great compilation.
Great, thank you, everyone. We have a question already. Are we taking into account input from producers like myself who have completed a production? This is from James. A safe way forward. He's completed a production utilizing the safe way forward plus additional protocols to keep everyone safe. Yes, James, at the end of this, it's actually, is it info, Michelle? info@producersguild.org. We are collecting stories, ideas, tips. We would love to hear anything that you have to offer us, especially having been in the field and completed a production and now prepping 3 more. So James, we would love to have your input. Thank you. I'm just going to quickly go through this. It's actually 8. It's going to only show 7 on this slide. That's how quickly things are moving in our world here. But these are things to consider when you're looking at either reviewing a COVID safety plan on a production that you're being asked to join, or you're making your own COVID safety plan. So the first thing is to make sure that you have zone systems in place. That is, right now, the recommendation is a zone A and a zone B, with zone C being everyone outside of the production. We are also looking at, and we've made some suggestions about breaking zone A into zone A1, A2, A3, however you want to delineate it, so that the closer you are to the actors, the people who are going to be without proper PPE at all times, there are different protocols for those people than if you're, for instance, an on-set dresser that's running in every once in a while, but in zone A. So zone systems in place, regular testing, regular screening before you get onto the production location, or whether you go onto the set, or whether you just report to work. So screenings with questions and answers, testing of everyone. Zone A is going to be tested 3 times a week, zone B once a week, and anyone, if there are any type of intimacy scenes or intimate scenes, then the suggestion is that you have fast acting tests that you can do that day for anyone that's involved in those. There's a section on physical distancing, which includes PPE, hygiene, safety, and sanitization. So in the protocols, it's a little unclear, but in our protocols, every single person should be fitted with full PPE, that is an N95 or KN95 mask and a face shield, regardless of whether you're in zone A or zone B. And the only time that that is allowed to not be is if you're an actor and the cameras are rolling. So everyone needs to get used to being in masks and full PPE gear during the entire production. And we'll talk a little bit more as we get further on. There also needs to be hand washing stations, sanitization, and all of these, and they're laid out pretty well in our summary document. Also, physical distancing needs to happen. We need to stay 6 feet away in full PPE from everyone. If you look at our red light protocols, the way to contact trace, if somebody tests positive, here's the rule. If you were closer than 6 feet with somebody for more than 10 minutes, then you need to be tested and isolated before you can come back to work. So it's really important to stay 6 feet away in full proper PPE. New positions and responsibilities. That includes the health and safety officer or health and safety supervisor and the health and safety manager. And we can talk a little bit about that as we go on. 10-hour shooting days. This has been a lot of conversation around this. 10-hour shooting days are what the epidemiologists tell us are the best for the health and safety of our crew and cast. It's for some of us who work on shows that go longer, 14, 16-hour days, the question seems like, well, if we're shooting shorter days, it's going to be longer that people are exposed on a production. But the epidemiologists have assured us that it's better to do a longer overall shoot in number of days with 10-hour days than 14-hour days and a shorter shoot. So we're recommending 10-hour days, knowing that ADs, producers, and other crew members, drivers are going to have staggered call times so that you can help people stay healthy and safe. Remote working and video conferencing, I don't know about all of you, but we're finding that there's a lot we can do remotely over Zoom, over video conferencing. So there'll be a lot of positions on one of our productions. Our entire production office is remote, which allows some interesting things. Like as producers, we can now start hiring people who aren't in our vicinity. So we usually have all of our production offices running out of wherever our main base is. But right now we have people, production coordinators, production PAs, people that are doing other things remotely, not having to be in the same city or even the same country, as long as they're working on our hours. So it's leading to a lot of really interesting ability for us to reach out farther into the community to hire people. No set visits, all sets are going to be closed. And the final one that's not on here is we need to really commit to production team member training, which includes a complete COVID safety training before everyone gets to set, which is also training on your production safety plan. So everyone knows what's in the plan, what they're committing to, what hygiene practices, how to wear proper PPE, and also privacy policies and anonymous reporting procedures, because we need to be really careful if somebody tests positive, how that is transmitted and communicated to the teams. So we can take that down now. And we have a question. Any wisdom, this is from Kay Rothman. Hello, Kay. Any wisdom on freelance producers hired by independent production companies where the production companies are asking the freelance producers to sign waivers, releasing the production company from any COVID liability? Should people turn down the work rather than sign such a document if it comes to that? Is that even a legally binding document? Good question, Kay. Who's the lawyer of the bunch that wants to answer that? Susan, would you like to answer that?
Yes, so I'll jump in. And by the way, Kay, we're running that by outside counsel in terms of the enforceability. It is generally the kind of thing that isn't enforceable, but I think like everything else in this time, it's a bit complicated. So the PGA has taken the position that no one should sign that document. So that's not a completely clear answer, but we would never tell anyone to sign that, because to the extent it is enforceable, you just don't want to be in that position. Obviously, what's very complicated is proving where someone got sick. And in certain states at the moment, the way workers' comp works, they presume if you get sick, you got it at work. I think that's true for California, but not many other states. So we'll follow up with that answer more completely once we get a definitive answer back from outside counsel.
Right. I think it's tricky for independent producers because it's very hard for us to get insurance right now covering liability. And so the choices for an independent producer are go to Canada where there's a government-backed insurance, go to France where there's government-backed insurance. I'm told Italy may have government-backed insurance, or try to shoot in America and limit your liability. But we still will not support the signing or the requirement to sign a waiver of liability for your safety. Stacy Herman, which agency has the best HSS training, and will the PGA eventually provide such training?
Actually, I've been looking at that for the last few days, and there's a group called Health Education Services that provides training for a COVID compliance officer. A lot of our members have already started taking that and making themselves available for the smaller productions. John Hopkins offers free, now that first one costs $50. It's a certificate program. Takes about 7 hours, I believe. John Hopkins offers tracing training, and it is contact tracing, learning how to do contact tracing, along with the ethics of contact tracing and all the side information that's needed for it. And that is offered free until December. And then Georgia also has, the Georgia Film Academy has what looks like a fairly decent training program about, for crew. It's mainly for grips and electric, but it is, and I don't know if that costs any money, but these are just some certificate programs that I've recently found that can help you learn whether you're creating your own program, running a program, or want to help out and support someone else's program. Not to mention all the other, I think IATSE has.
Yeah, Contract Services is working on developing one of their training modules, but I don't have an estimate on when it's going to be done, but I did hear that they are working on it. So.
Right.
Great, thank you, Harvey. Stacy said she got trained through the first one that you mentioned, so there you go. BD Gunnell is asking, is one of the unions stepping in to take responsibility for the COVID health safety supervisor, and is the PGA looking to make that a producer position? Good question.
I know the DGA is not looking to unionize this position, and some shows are hiring a COVID compliance coordinator where some production 871 production coordinators are able to get hired and paid as a production coordinator, but to do this specific job. But as far as I've heard right now, no union is trying to adopt this position. It's more of a studio position.
Well, I think it's important to sort of differentiate between health and safety supervisor and sort of the management of the health and safety, you know, the sort of logistics of it all, because I think that the health and safety supervisor, in my opinion, should be somebody who has some form of medical background training, and perhaps you can get that training through one of these programs, but that it would, and that person has to have a certain amount of authority for us producers to go to say, is this, you know, or if they see something that is not compliant, to say we have to, or if there's somebody tests positive, or there's a situation where they have the sort of authority to shut things down, pause, take a break and figure out how to sort of alleviate the problem. I think then there's the management of all of the logistical, organizing. I mean, today, just for instance, in Toronto, we have a company that will do the testing. We have a lab that will be the lab. There's a 24-hour turnaround, but just today, in conversations with my team in Toronto and based on what other shows that are going before us have experienced, there needs to be a person that is just making those lists and coordinating when people get tested and coordinating handing out PPE and coordinate, so that's a management. There's like a sort of logistical management piece of it that doesn't necessarily require that medical knowledge. So I think it's important to kind of differentiate between the two, in my opinion. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Yeah.
But,
I think, Mary Jo, that how we were kind of explaining it in our documents is the health and safety supervisor, you think of as someone from like public health, someone who has a medical background, someone who's dealing with epidemiologists or is one themselves, someone who understands how things spread. And then the health and safety manager is a production person, someone who understands production, but works to implement what the health and safety supervisor has put out as protocols. Obviously, the health and safety manager needs to understand, how to communicate with the ADs because they're going to be scheduling a lot of these kind of things. Or if it's a bigger production, there might be a whole team of people. So yeah, I think that's a good way to think about them. Thank you for pointing that out.
If I could add one, I think that's on the larger programs. It's easy to have a separation of job responsibilities, but as you get smaller and smaller with the programming and can't hire a larger staff, I think one important thing to avoid is piling the responsibilities on someone else on the production. We're hearing more and more that some people are trying to do that, either giving it off to a production coordinator or to a production manager and asking them to carry forth with that. This is far too important to give to somebody who already has a full-time job.
I would agree, Harvey. You might have a production manager as your health and safety manager. Their job cannot also be running the production. They should just be running the health and safety management, and you should have another production manager who's running the production. As those of us who have been in this can attest, it is an extra full-time producing job just to manage the health and safety of your crew. It is hours and hours of work, making sure that your crew and teams are healthy. And hopefully some of these documents will make it a little easier to kind of get through the information enough to put your plans in place. Someone was asking if someone already answered. Is this going to be posted, Michelle? Is this video?
Yes, I was actually just responding. It should be posted tomorrow. You'll see a link in the newsletter.
Perfect. And how, Mary Jo or Jen or Chris even, or Gare, have you guys done anything in terms of further breaking out zone systems, that like zone A for people that are working directly with actors? Have you tackled that yet?
Go ahead.
No, you go, Chris.
Okay, well, we literally just did that today in our dry run. And we really did separate zone A as being critical. So that's camera, anyone who touches a camera. Obviously, there's makeup that has to do touch-ups and anything like that. Anyone who's around the actors. So we did the game of do-si-do today, where you really rotate between people setting up the stage, setting up the set, and then the zone A team coming in. And what I can tell you is that the switch over, you start to realize there's a lot of little tiny challenges that you don't anticipate when you're just trying to, map this all out. From the direction that people are going to walk when they're leaving a stage, especially if you have multi-directional walkways. that you need 6 feet between each person as they're switching creates a lot of problems for a stage that's already set, because you'll lose a ton of space. So you actually have to redo your set design, or you'll lose, like today we had to move our greens completely because there wasn't enough space for people to stay safe. So improvisational changes seem to be what are happening, even when we did have, you know, the most thoughtful, oh, you're in zone A, you're in zone B, never the two shall cross. It was a little bit inevitable today. So I think that's something to bear in mind, is that there's no perfect way to do it. Each production will be unique.
Where? Go ahead, Mary Jo.
No. And I would just echo that, like, the drive run idea is something that everybody should really consider. I mean, just to dial it back a little bit further, we, you know, it was very close to shooting when we shut down for COVID. We now just got the go to sort of get going, which I'm further along than a drive run, but I would just also encourage everyone, if you have the time and the luxury, which I do, I'm on a studio project. We've been afforded, you know, the opportunity to have some of our crew members come on, even on a non-consecutive basis, to start consulting, because every department has different needs. And you find out, like, what we're finding in, you know, my line producer is like, you know, going department by department, going through, having them put together what they think. Everybody's, I mean, at least on our show, everybody's read all the, you know, the way forward documents, and their unions are putting out stuff. So they're sort of taking a combination of those things and saying, okay, well, how can we make this particular show? And like you said, Chris, every show is different. So I would encourage you to talk to your departments and figure out what their needs are too, to figure out what workflows are, and then what the flow of traffic is. Because we, even today, I was, you know, in conversation with my line producer and our costume designer, and, you know, what we thought would be sort of, she has a different idea of who she thinks should be in zone A versus what we originally thought, based on just looking at other people's plans. So, and she's not wrong. And, you know, again, this is a 10 episode series. With multiple directors and, you know, locations and stage sets. And, you know, so it's given everybody information, particularly our line producer and production manager, who are dealing with facilities, to sort of figure out what that flow is. It's really, you know, again, like, sort of wanting to focus on the creative and the scripts and all of that, I find myself having, you have to, no matter what your position is as a producer, whether you're a creative producer or line producer, you're gonna get mired in the minutia, you know, and it's good to talk to your department heads in advance, and then let that lead to a dry run. Because I think, and do it in advance, well, and it is much in advance as you can, because we're just learning things every minute of every day, and it changes, you know, so lots of interesting learning curves and surprises too.
I played with, and I haven't done a dry run, so I have no idea if it would even work, but I was playing with some ideas, breaking it down further, whether or not the zone A people could be categorized into people that are associated with, that are gonna be dealing with cast, or people that are just gonna be dealing with the set. A tip I heard this week that I thought was interesting from a show that shot a few days, they said, make sure, like, for instance, like your grip and lighting teams, like, try not to have your zones have all the same department in them, because if one person goes down, you're gonna lose your entire department. So if you send grip and lighting in to work on the set, you want to have it a combo team, maybe like an A and B team for grip and lighting or something, so that if someone does test positive and you contact trace that team, you have to interrupt grip and lighting team. So I thought that was an interesting take on it to consider, is don't just automatically group your departments into specific, entire departments into specific zones. So
that's interesting. Chris, how are you dealing with staging zones, the zone A on set?
Oh boy, so that was one of our challenges today, and they did a great job, but physically trying to keep those areas apart, obviously you're working in the same space. So what happens is they overlap. It's just basically teams go in, teams go out. The most important thing that we realized today was zone A and zone B need to leave through different doorways. so that they're not cross-contaminating or there's not as many touch points. So that leaves less work for people to clean and disinfect. So we had very specific doors, and so that took some time to communicate to our stand-ins today, who were actually our safety crew, being our actors. But even they had questions about which way do I go, where do I stay? But we did keep them very separate. There was 2 separate tent areas. And to Jen's point about what she just said about the 2 teams needing to cross-connect, or if someone gets contaminated or gets sick, there was a need constantly for people in Team A, especially camera, to say, well, what if when we leave, someone has a question, or they need to do something, or they need to tape something, or they need to move a cable, but that's us. We can't go back and forth. So there were designated people from what would be the camera department in the B team and vice versa, so that they could lend a hand, and they just stayed with that group. And then they communicated via walkie-talkie.
That's great. One of the things we're contemplating in our documents is having like zone A through A1, A2, A3, A1 being those who need to be closer than 6 feet to a cast member who might not be in PPE. Zone A2 maybe being those who need to approach the cast closer than 6 feet offset. So BD Gunna was asking about the hair and makeup trailer and cast trailers. So we would, in this particular example, we would suggest that they're in zone A2, still the same testing protocols, but just located in a different area of the set. And then zone A3, those who need access to the current set, as Jen was saying, but they don't need access to the cast. You still need to make sure that people are being tested more frequently if they have, on-set dressers, people that are in and out of the set more frequently than your ability to make sure it's sanitized. So.
Just out of curiosity, Chris, what are you doing with the guy that does the person that's doing the digital intermediate? That's usually in a tent that the DP wants to go over and see what the image is really looking like.
The DIT.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different video villages set up, and there's not one area.
Right.
And so it literally, people are just walking around with iPads looking at different layers of security. So some people can see something, some people can't see. But I think there's more flexibility in who would normally be allowed to look at a camera or see through a lens or see what the village is looking at or playback. Everyone's more flexible because they understand that someone's going to see something that someone else didn't. So I think those have laxed because, but what is not is that there really is no central place anymore. It's very distributed.
Good question. There's a question about, there's all these COVID compliance officer training programs popping up. And if there's no one set of protocols or guidelines, how do you know that you're getting trained properly to make sure that you're compliant if there is no official consensus on safety protocols? It's a very good question. The PGA hopes that everyone loves our guidelines so much in their detail that everyone will just say, just follow PGA. But it's the exact point that when we first started this, we wanted to get a consensus from the industry. There's too many reasons to go into the details of why that becomes difficult. But what I can say is that the producers on the task force, hours and hours and hours and hours of time they've spent looking at the protocols that are out there. And as producers, I think it is in our DNA to share information, especially when it comes to the health and safety of our crews. If we find something that's working, we want to let everyone know. And so we're hoping to set up these kind of the tips from the field and things where we can, quickly share information and get this information out to the widest possible audience, including anyone who's not even in the PGA, because we'd like everyone to follow our guidelines. So hopefully they will follow the producers' guidelines, which follow the Safe Way Forward and the AMPTP. We've just detailed it a little bit more.
And I'll say, maybe there's not an official uniform training right now, but at the same time, if you're a union show, if you're having to apply for signatory with the unions, they're all asking to approve safety plans. So part of that is going to be, okay, well, did you design your plan? And then who is implementing it? And so you know, as long as you have that officer that is implementing that plan, you know, that if they understand it and they have a way to implement it, then to me, that personally, that would make them qualified to be that person, right? They know the plan, they know how to execute it. So
also, I think you have to separate the training from the protocol that's being used on the production. Every network, every studio, every production company is going to have their own protocol. The training is going to give you the underlying basis for understanding what is happening with the virus and how to deal with it, and give you a basic understanding of how to follow protocol. But anyone that presents a protocol that's different or separate, hopefully it's been vetted by public health. And that's one of the things that if you're designing your own, it should be put in front of someone in public health, medical personnel, epidemiologists to approve and make sure that you've covered all the bases.
Thank you. Thanks. One other question, same person. Wouldn't it be safer if the HSS isn't hired by production and doesn't have to worry about being fired by production for speaking up against safety violations, more like a fire safety officer? What does the task force think of that?
On studio productions, it actually is hired by the studio. I mean, it's a separate entity, which gives great comfort. I'm curious what people are finding in the independent realm, because it's, you know, I feel sort of comforted by that it's a studio hire, not a production hire. We get to interview that person and sort of have a you know, a say in it, but we don't get where it is not under our supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the independent producers, because we don't have a studio behind us, we might have a financier behind us that doesn't actually have any authority or understanding in the world of epidemiology. I think that as independent producers, we're used to taking on the liability. I can't imagine a producer hiring someone from the medical profession who's working as the health and safety supervisor and firing them for pointing out a violation that's this serious, because this is life and death. This is not, I know that a lot of other, you know, hazards for safety are life and death, but this one is literally life and death. So we have very clear suggestions on how people report, like anonymous reporting, and also how the health and safety supervisor works with the producer to shut down the production, and what you need to do when somebody tests positive. So if people are following the protocols, and if the producers have the guidelines and they've sent them out to everyone on production, then I think if any health and safety supervisor gets fired, that is a good time for a crew to question why they got fired. Does anyone want to add to that? I just, let's see. Whoa. Kay Rothman again, we're hearing more about how respiratory droplets suspended in the air linger for a while and could expose people to the virus, even if they aren't in the same space at the exact same time. Are you finding you need leave room in the schedules between zone switches to literally let the air clean? We've definitely had people talk about every hour shutting down the shooting crew, letting people have a mask break, and turning on whatever air conditioning to blow out the systems, and the same for production offices. So, and there are a lot of productions that are retrofitting their air systems so that they're purifying the droplets that are in the air. So yes, it's a good practice to do, and especially because the science is still, you know, changing. I would err on the side of being cautious and take breaks during the set, during your shooting day.
And I just want to add one other thing. If people follow the protocols, the only people who should ever be on set without a mask are the actors.
Yep.
So that even though you're going to leave some time and clean, everyone who's on that set should still be in full PPE. So that ought to, as long as you adhere to those protocols, should also diminish that risk.
Full PPE, which includes the N95 mask and a face shield or goggles, depending upon what department you're in. So we're all going to get used to wearing all that.
One of the things I wanted to add is that there was a conversation today, and they are debating how they're going to handle it. But special effects was interesting. Fans blowing on greens was what you don't even think about it. Just leaves blowing in the wind, and but that fan can circulate air all around that soundstage, and so there were just a few discussions about that.
Yep, good question. Also smoke, also, you know, all the special effects that we take for granted, we need to start considering, you know, running past the medical professionals that we have on our sets to go through and have those vetted for us.
I want to hear how that fan thing ended. To me, that's low. Was that not a plus? What was the argument against the fans?
It wasn't against it. It was just that they noticed that there were fans blowing from multiple directions. And so if there are particles in the air, they didn't want it to be blowing around the actors because the windows were open on stage. So it's just a thought of, is it hyper circulating anything that we're not aware of? So there was no decision about it. It was just brought up as a concern.
Okay.
BD Gunnell, where do producers fit into the zones? Do you move between or have a producer assigned to each zone? Good question. Our protocols are that there are certain producers, a creative producer and a line type producer in zone A, and the rest are in zone B, but you have somebody that you've tagged. So in case you go down and test positive for some reason, you have someone who's following the testing protocols for zone A in case someone has to swap in for you.
But someone doesn't go back and forth between zones.
Nope, you don't go back and forth between zones. You're either in zone A and you're with the zone A team, or you're in zone B. The only way to go from zone B to A is to get a rapid test, and unless you're following the zone A protocols and not talking to anyone in zone B. So lots of remote conversations and visiting of shops. Can anyone speak to the state? This is Jackie Stolfi, sorry. Can you speak to the state of testing in the US right now and the availability of production securing nasal PCR tests?
There you go.
Anyone want to take that?
I mean, we've had companies do presentations. A lot of them are saying that the closer to the fall, the end of the year, they'll have more available. But I think, especially August, like I don't think anyone seemed to say that they had an abundance, but a couple were saying, yeah, their production is ramping up more in September and through the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I think there are some companies that have, gotten ahead of procuring private testing. I think depending on where I also think it's like state and city specific. I think, just speaking from some, what I've heard from colleagues in New York who are getting underway, they've had to switch companies a couple times because they were promised a 48-hour turnaround, and then all of a sudden it was 4 days, 5 days, still when they had to switch companies. I mean, I think it's still very, very inconsistent.
Yeah, and just, we said this last week, but just to be clear, PCR tests are the only tests that we're recommending that you do these consistent tests. So it's a PCR, either the way back into your brain test or nasal swab. Both of those are accurate enough to use in our testing protocols. There are many, many, many organizations out there selling selling antibody tests and other types of tests that we wouldn't recommend being used as your primary testing protocol. Our recommendation is, which is in the safe way forward, is the PCR testing 3 times a week and once a week for zone B. And we recommend also having a fast acting antigen test, which also tests for the virus. And those need to be on hand if somebody does need to go from zone B to zone A, or if you have, for example, a scene that has intimacy and you need to fast test them in between the 3 days a week testing. Someone's shooting in a water tank. So from a safety perspective, too many people need to have Zone A clearance. Has anyone dealt with that in Zone A? And how do you establish that in your schedule as fit it into your lab? Tank, anyone done water tanks yet? Okay, we will get back to you on that. Tune in next week. Let's make a note of that.
Yeah, does the water, is it, I'm not sure why the water tank is increasing it's just a matter of you have a big, large Zone A and you're going to have to test that many more people 3 times a week. Yeah, and space that out. Yeah, figure out, that's what a lot of these COVID compliance coordinators doing, is literally just tracking testing for the entire crew. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, even on these small, like a small unscripted show we have one person that's just scheduling the testing. It's going to 6 different countries. How are we getting the testing? It's a, not to scare anyone off, but it is a big job to make sure that during a global pandemic that everyone is safe.
And by the way, Lori and I just got off of a call with SAG, and I think the fact that there's more people will not have them relax those standards. If anything, they're more likely to tighten them, because that means there's more potential exposure for the actors.
Yeah, so I would, if you have anyone that's potentially going into Zone A, you're going to have to keep them away from Zone B people and have them following the testing protocols for sure. What is the recommendation for a very small shoot for digital or nonfiction? For example, an interview with 3 or 4 crew members. Does it make sense to increase the crew size in those situations when you're trying to keep things small? And if so, what is that person's role or title?
I can talk to literally something that we've done for the PGA. With IMDb, we're shooting some testimonials, and we opted literally to go on Zoom, to record on Zoom, because we just didn't have a budget. And so I know that doesn't answer the question directly, but we kind of just reversed the engines and went the complete opposite direction and got permission for that.
I can tell you. Go ahead, Harvey.
Yeah, I was speaking with one of our members who is doing commercial work. And those are relatively small crews. And she was actually working as a compliance officer, as a COVID compliance officer. And I think it's worth having somebody look it over, make sure you've got the PPE, even if they're not on set, and then have someone manage the day of, if you're talking about 3 or 4 people. But you've got to make sure that somebody who is trained has looked it over. But really important, and something that she was saying that we touched on, that Lori touched on earlier, is that she found that the crew were showing up and didn't know how to stay safe and didn't know how to keep other people safe. When it was a 1 or 2 day shoot, it's how you don't stop and train them for half a day and then lose most of your shooting time, but you do have to get them the information ahead of time and make sure that they do have the information, that they're trained in some way, shape, or form, or you say, if you're going to show up, you've got to read this first and make sure that you let me know that you've read it, so that when you show up on set, you'll follow our protocol, a code of conduct, so to speak, to make sure that your small crew for the 1 day isn't saying, oh, it's just 1 day, I'll come in and leave. You know, they have to keep each other safe, and you've got to make sure that they do.
Yeah, we have our the EVP of production run through with every single. We do small, unscripted, independent shoots, and I have my EVP of production talk to every single crew member about, like, are they willing to do all these 7 things, and if they're not, we don't bring them onto that shoot. And further, we have someone on set who's managing the testing. And if you only have a 2-day shoot, the protocol is you test them within 24 hours of showing up, and then you don't have to retest after that. The test is good for those 2 days. The thing to that we didn't know, that we found out the hard way, is that you may procure PCR tests and antigen tests, and you may know that this lab will process them, but you need a medical script. You need somebody who's doing the tests, like actually administering the tests on site or going to the people's homes, and also sending in the requisition for the lab to run those tests. So be careful if you have people saying, we've procured all these great PCR tests and all these antigen tests, because and we have time at a lab, because you also need to then hire a doctor or someone qualified to actually administer the tests. So make sure, you can also hire a company that will do all of it, the whole thing, but there are a lot of companies out there now who are saying, we have these tests and we can sell them to you.
You know, this process is really interesting because as a producer myself, I listen to all these questions, and the thing that keeps going through my mind is the importance of the first AD who has the proper temperament. And you know, while Chris was talking about how you have to move all the people around on the set and you have to have this exit and that exit, there was one first AD that was going through my mind as, this is the perfect person who has the calm demeanor to handle all of that. And, you know, one of the first questions from one of our members was, you know, take into account from producers who've shot already and are prepping other shows. And, you know, the question that I would want to ask mostly is, you know, where did temperament come into play with this? Because there's so much more restrictions in some ways that you really need a respectful person.
Mm. We have about 4 more minutes, so we're going to get hopefully to the last 2 questions. But if you have any other questions that we don't get to tonight, please either put them in right now, or we go to send an email to info@producersguild.org, both with questions that you want us to answer next week or get to next week, and also with any tips from the field. Please, we're collecting them, and all information is needed and wanted. Is that Mitzi? Do you expect a government rep will spot check sets to make sure protocols are followed? We do expect union reps will definitely be out at every production that they possibly can. And how much discussion has there been about the moral issues of moving forward, especially productions with actors of tender age? I think that those are the questions that every producer that has anyone who is in a group that is, what's the word? That is a high risk group. Thank you. Thanks. That's a high risk group, needs to really consider, look, and I'm business partners with Morgan Freeman. He's not listening, I hope, but he's one of those tender age individuals. So it is a big discussion in our company about whether or not we will go back before there is a vaccination or herd immunity. And I think it's really important for us all to consider the safety of anyone that's in a high risk group, including crew members. And that's why the protocols are in place so that everyone's safe. So even high risk individuals are safe, but no one is 100% safe. And that's what's the downside here. Zone A and B, someone wants to describe what that means. For example, zone A is obviously the main shooting set. Is zone B outside the soundstage or just a certain distance from the main set? Who wants to take that?
I could talk about what ours was today in our dry run. So that it's a combination of both a physical space, but also a group of people. So our main set was, people would swing in and out of it. So it was a place for both A and B zones. And so that's why there was a lot of cleaning in between when they would go in and out, because zone B was lighting, grip, you know, anyone doing set design, build, whatever it was. And then zone A was anyone interacting with actors. And so then when you got outside though, those zoned groups had their own areas to keep them separate, but they did overlap on the main stage.
Great. I think we're good.
Good.
That's it. Thank you everyone for joining us again tonight. Please, again, if you have any additional questions, info@producersguild.org. And this will be up probably tomorrow if you heard something and didn't get to write down quickly enough, whatever it was, and want to review it. So thank you all. Have a really lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lori.